What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on the Habitat Podcast YouTube channel. Appreciate you all tuning in here. Got a special guest. You guys all know him. You love him. Al Tomechko. How's it going tonight, my friend?
Good, buddy. Good. Deer season's still going here in Ohio, which you know that. It's just like unbelievable because I've been thinking about habitat, for a long time already and have started cutting a little bit. So it's crazy to think that there are still guys out there that are, God bless them, that are still chasing whitetails because it feels like it
Yeah.
should have been over for a while. I know a lot of states are closed, but Ohio is it's a marathon. So I'm excited for it to be officially over and really dive into the habitat.
Yeah, it seems like it goes slower when you're tagged out because we kind of been texting back and forth, kind of worried about what bucks are still coming around and, you know, any of them leaving to go to the neighbors because it was muzzleloader season. Then we had a second gun season, and like you said, the archery is going to go into February. So
Yeah.
we're getting
Well,
there.
I mean, let's just face it. It's in Ohio. It's a bait state. So anytime, especially when it comes into a late fire, which these muzzle loaders are modern firearms. It's not
Right.
flintlock like parts of Pennsylvania. I mean, we're talking about inline muzzle loaders. Guys are shooting deer at 215 yards. I mean, it's a high power rifle with one shot is what it is. But um, which is fine. I mean, I've killed plenty of deer with mine, but
Sure.
um, when it comes down to it, you get real cold weather during muzzleloader season. The only thing that saves deer in Ohio during that time is the fact that it's right after the holidays. Because it's like, I think it was like the first Saturday after Christmas. So there's a lot of people who had taken time off for the holidays, with their family. They just don't have the time to hunt.
Yeah.
But if you have the time to hunt that 4-day season, you still have a tag in your pocket and there's a mature deer on your farm. Um, if you go out and dump a whole bunch of corn or apples or mixtures, I know some guys are putting out soybeans for the high fat content. Um, if you have a good wind and good approach, like there's a good chance of getting an opportunity at a buck, and a lot of big deer are dying that way, and also with a bow. Nothing wrong with it, but to your point of saying like we killed our deer quite a while ago now, and it's not like we're going and dumping corn because just the sake of time. We just my wife and I just had a baby. Life's busy. We're not putting corn out there just to try to keep deer alive. Maybe we should be, should be,
Yeah.
but when a deer all of a sudden was around, and then he's not, you start to go, well, maybe somebody dumped a big old pile of corn and he got killed during with 3 weeks left in the season, which is a little bit of a bummer. But then you're also like, yeah, another one will move in. And you're happy for the hunter too.
No doubt. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. We do a lot of talking about habitat improvements, how to implement them, when to do them, and we've even shown how to do some of them in our videos. But what I want to do today is kind of break down our successful season on the same piece of property where we harvested two mature bucks, how we executed those habitat and hunting plans that kind of led us to that success and why it worked. I mean, like I said, we so often are talking about what we're doing and how and why, but we don't often talk about, how it all came together and what we did to make that happen. So I kind of want to pick your brain on that. Let's kind of recap the 2024 habitat season. What were your plans? Because we had kind of come up with a couple of new ideas, a lot of maintenance from the older stuff that you had been doing for years, but kind of recap your thought process of going into 2024 and what you wanted to get accomplished habitat wise.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing in the last, I just will say 2 years is cutting. And I mean, I've done cutting and I've done TSI and I've done invasive habitat, but removal, but not to the level that I think was adequate, at least to kind of move the needle, if you will, from a whitetail's perspective. I mean, we were having success. We've killed a pile of deer and but really wanted to kind of fine tune a lot of that. So, 20, end of 2023, you and I started in and, we're call a spade a spade. Fortunate enough to have a relatively large size farm, at least for the eastern half of the United States. We're at 300 plus contiguous acres.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do want to for people who listen, have that put into perspective. But we took a 17 plus acre single bottom, not just one bottom that we were working on, and we did major uh, crop tree release through there. So basically, taking you'd have a white oak, let's say, and five or six maple or an elm or a weak poplar or a junk cherry. Not every cherry or not every even oak is going to be a timber tree, right? So you kind of like I relied on the state foresters, quite honestly, two or three different ones who were just fantastic in my region. To kind of teach me, over the last several years, like what to look for. And then once you kind of get the hang of it, so we went through, and I'm not really worried about um, making bedding and necessarily, but like darn well that those deer are going to bed, in there. I mean, they're certainly going to eat in there. And I mean, we just punched some major holes in that canopy. I know there was one video we had posted up where, um, you know, I had fell a maple tree. It was like a quadruple trunk maple, so it's kind of an unusual tree to fell due to the terrain and stuff. I mean, I don't know, that tree was 120 foot high, probably 100 foot high. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
huge tree. And you take that out of the canopy, I mean, you look up and it's daylight. So, long winded way of saying that was a big focus. And then, of course, going to every food plot and just cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting the edge, and trying to punch holes to where it's not just a wall, right? Now, there are some walls, right? And that's good browse, and the deer can go over. And I had pictures tonight of deer eating on some of those treetops we fell last year. Um, but then also having, specific trails opened up within that cutting so they can go from, where it's real thick around the edge to come back up into the plot and then vice versa, go back down in through. So really trying to make the deer feel comfortable. Um, that was a big thing, part of what you and I did a lot of work on, cutting and edge feathering, treating invasives, um, adding more food. I actually removed a little bit of kind of some junk brush on one field, and we added another, I don't know, it was like 2 acres. Had a guy come in with a mulching mower or mulching head on a skid steer and do that. That was the end of 2023, early 2024. So he did I think it was a 12-hour day. And I mean, you couldn't, I think I paid like $1,000, which isn't nothing. I mean, it was definitely like, oh, is this worth it? But you couldn't rent the
Yeah.
machine
No.
and
No. For that
operate it
amount
for
of
that.
work. Yeah.
I mean, he worked his tail off and cleared on pretty steep terrain.
I was
He
gonna
cleared
say
like
it's not the easiest terrain to work on either,
no, and there was snow
especially if
on the
you're not
ground.
familiar with a big machine like that.
Oh yeah, like it would have taken me a week. So like that was really another big investment in the farm of just keeping deer around because again, shoot more deer, plant more food, or both, right? And we've tried to maintain both. This year was a little bit tough for me just with having a baby um, in October. That getting a chance to shoot as many does off the farm as I'd like to was difficult. But in years past, I mean, we posted some pictures. We hit the does pretty good, um, and then we wanted to add more food as well. So that was part of the plan. And then lastly, I where I ended up killing my deer, that was really cool because I drew that out 2 years ago, where we had about a 6.5 acre Norway spruce, maybe some red pine, just overgrown, closed canopy ridge top. And I had been trying to sell that timber for probably 8 years. I've talked to private foresters, state foresters, local loggers, like nobody wanted that. And I kept calling around, and I finally had a guy who's like, "Yeah, I actually have a." He was like a smaller operation. At least that was the way he presented it to me. He's like, "I got a local mill that will use that." So I said, okay. So he came, he looked at it, and one tip I give to people is I drew the contract up myself. I used Onyx to draw the maps out. I'm like, you're not permitted to be outside of this area on the GPS. Really detailed, right? I drew where I wanted trails cut in with the dozer post logging. I also drew in where I wanted it left with treetops to make it thicket. And then I also drew in where I wanted it cleared for a food plot.
Yeah.
I said I want all trails regraded. I highlighted all of this stuff. I'm totally indemnified of any liability. Like using, you can find some general contracts, but definitely if you're going to do this like I did without a forest consulting forester, which I use a consulting forester, but that particular piece was actually out of my forestry agreements because they said if you can ever sell it, sell it. But there's not a whole lot there. This was like the best case scenario. I actually made money selling that timber,
Right.
and it wasn't nothing. It was a decent chunk of change, especially for what it was, and added like a 2 or 3 acre. I think it's about a 3 acre food plot that's in the center of like let's say a 80 acre block of the property, and then there's a trail now that goes through the center of the clear cut that was like a dozer blade and a half wide, right? So it's probably 15 foot wide, let's say. Um, yeah, it's probably maybe 12 foot wide. So I then planted that with the Vital IC clover and oats mix. So you literally now have this ridge top that's clear cut with a trail in the middle and then two trails on the side before it goes down into these big bottoms, which happen to be the big bottoms that we did this big TSI work on, right? We did cut 17 acres in the one. We're going to cut 19 acres in the other bottom this winter, at least start in on it. Plus, I've done edge feathering on both edges, right? So actually, the 117 acre bottom on the top of that ridge. So it kind of is this big bottom, comes up, there's a ridge, and then it comes up a little bit more, and that's where this big flat food plot is, a clear cut. Well, on that secondary ridge, we're actually doing what's called a mid-story removal. So that's like a miniature clear cut, and that's on like a 6 acre flat basically there before you get into that big 17 acre piece that we clear cut.
Sure.
So you have like three levels of varying levels of cutting as the deer can kind of work up, eat on the browse, get up there. And there's a mixture of flush cuts, hinge cuts, stump sprouts. So there's tops and stump sprouts and everything coming up through. And then, of course, now that sunlight's been in there for a year, you're getting a lot of flush of native forbs and browsable species. And then on those trails where we do get sunlight, again, I put down the clover. So you have all of that. It comes together, and then a 3 acre field where we put in Nitro Boost in the summer, which is our summer mix at Vitalize, and then we put in Carbon Load in the fall, which is obviously our fall food plot mix or cover crop mix, whatever you want to use for. We're
Right.
using for
Right.
deer hunting, so we'll call it food plot. But um, it is about as good as you can get, in my opinion, from an access perspective. So you have all of that coming together, and then we moved to box ply, which was a little bit sketchy with the terrain again. But we came up with an idea. I'm going to say we. I hope you don't mind taking some credit, but we came up with an idea of getting it onto a trailer and then kind of lowering it with the bucket of the tractor.
Yeah.
Minimal damage. I mean, honestly, it worked out pretty good because it's a big, heavy wooden box pine that I've had for years. It's nice, but it's just heavy, solid wood. And we got that set up, and you basically can walk to that blind almost totally undetected with a northeast wind or really with a north wind. And that's exactly what I had on this particular deer that I decided to go in after. And that particular deer, I have known that I found a picture from 2021. I shared it with a couple of people, and they thought it was him in the summertime. Um, they're like, that looks, I mean, he has similar eye guards, like similar width. I don't know for sure. It was in velvet. It would be cool to think it was him at like, that would have been, he would have been at that age 4, I guess.
Okay.
Um, so it's possible, like to be, he probably was maybe even a little bit wider than he was when I ended up killing him, if that was him.
Right.
And then I ended up giving for sure pictures of him in 2022, like absolute certainty. And then I don't know how many pictures I had of him last year, but our good buddy, Greg very well. When I first showed him pictures of him in 2022 or 2023, I apologize if the dates are wrong. Greg goes, man, he looks like a D8 dozer blade. I'm going to call him Dozer because he was so just wide, and he didn't have real good tine length, but he just was wide and crazy mass, real thick mass. And kind of, had pictures of him off and on. He kind of was one of those deer, he'd vanish for a while. And I don't know, 4 or 5 days before season, I get like 2 or 3 days in a row of that deer coming into that food plot in daylight, like legal shooting. I don't remember exactly. Like, it was certainly not real early, but it was early enough. And on this particular food plot too, when they cut, they left all white and red oaks all the way along those ridges. So
Yeah.
now you have acorns raining down. So like I'll add to why I'm bringing that up. And I had also marked several oaks that when they cleared out that they left some younger oaks standing. So now those are my seed trees into like right on the edge of the food plot in the clear cut. So one, they're awesome because they're dropping acorns, but two, they're basically seed trees into this now clear cut that's hopefully going to regen as oak regen. And yeah, that deer, I mean, we knew a lot of deer were coming in. They were hammering that carbon load food plot, super dry this year in southeast, well, in most of Ohio, but certainly southeastern Ohio. And we had gotten a little bit of rain actually. I think it was that Saturday. And I had told my cousin, I'm like, it was the Sunday, so second day of season. Or we got rain the Friday, I'm sorry. So Saturday opened up. My cousin shot a doe Saturday morning, was awesome. And then Saturday evening, I actually had an encounter with a deer that we were called double flyers. He's a pretty nice deer, and had him at like 58 or 60 yards. Read the script almost perfectly. He was about just 30 yards a bit too far. And I went in after him on opening day thinking I knew he was in the area. And he came out and fed and fed and fed and crossed this creek drainage and just didn't come any closer, which was a little bit of a bummer, but I'm happy it worked out. So then the next day, northeast wind, perfect access. I went in. I'm like, let's see what happens. And I end up shooting Dozer at 18 yards and sent in the teeth for cementomanuali. And he was 7.5 years old. So if I ever kill an older deer, it'll be pure luck because that's. I mean, it was a lot of luck going into killing that one, but I mean, I was blown away. I mean, I knew he was old. He was just massive body, pretty darn good set of antlers. He ended up having, I think, we counted the antlers a bunch, but I think he had 15 scoreable points
Yeah.
when you count in the kickers and this and that. I mean, I could fit my waist inside of his antler spread. I mean, which was
Yeah.
just
Beautiful buck.
like crazy. The pictures don't really do him justice, other than like maybe the one where I'm looking at him this like from the pictures from the back, because he just has so much character.
Right.
And what I end up wanting to say is about those oaks, why it's so critical when you're selling timber and coming up with a plan is the next day. So I shoot Dozer, he's quartered away slightly. It hits the back of the front lung, the liver, and basically the center punches the offside lung. And the arrow looked really good. And it took him a second or two to bleed. Remember, we don't, we got a little bit of rain that Friday, but the ground's dry, so it takes a lot of blood to show up when the ground's that dry, But once we got over to some leaves and stuff, it took probably 10 minutes to track him. I mean, he's bleeding really steady, running downhill. But I mean, we had to get him out of there. You're talking the deer weighed 194 pounds gutted. So you're thinking we're trying to get him out before gutting him, just because our setup, we got a hose up at the barns. It's like, man, if you can get him up there and gut him, it's so much. Just you got good lighting. We're winching this deer out. I mean, we're making so much ruckus, but we don't pressure the farm. Other than that, like there's never any real
Yeah.
pressure. We don't
Yeah.
go
I,
for
I
height
want to
speed.
get into that heavy too after you're done, but go ahead.
And the next day, I'm like, well, I guess I'll just hang out at the house here, and my cousin Zach he goes, maybe I'll go back to that same spot, you were at and this and that. And I was on the phone. I'm getting these texts from him all of a sudden. In the same field that I killed Dozer in, Zach was going to go there. underneath one of those oak trees was one of our other 5.5-year-old shooters that had that bent G2, uh,
Mm-hmm.
no, G3.
Right.
Um, and he was in there at like 4 in the afternoon, just eating acorns and then eating some vitalized carbon load, then going back to and it's like 4 o'clock, and Zach, honestly, he ended up backing out because he's like, I'm not going to be able to get into the blind because the deer was already out there, and the access is good. Could he have possibly, maybe, but I think we could make that access just a smidge better. There's like a
Right.
little finger of trees. I just going to cut with like Fisker snips, just a little tiny trail to sneak behind this finger of trees and pop into that blind for that reason. But I mean, that's the key to low pressure. I mean, that deer, um, Dozier, 7.5-year-old, he basically probably didn't make a mistake for about 10 years. He made one mistake. I was fortunate enough to be there. And I think it all comes down to lowest hole in the bucket is food. What are we doing? We're maximizing food, whether it be through timber management or food plots or a mixture of both, fruit trees, all that kind of good stuff. That's in this area. That is the number one lowest hole in the bucket. And number two is pressure. So if you can do those two things, you can have a ton of success. And that kind of leads into, you know, your success. I know you were jumping around and it was like, man, that one deer, he's like kind of like a half rack, but not really a true half rack. He had like that funky side. I mean, that was one that we were after. He was
Mm-hmm.
10. He's like 10. And, we were talking about that deer, and it was like you'd go one spot, that deer would show up in daylight at the other, and jumping
Right.
around. It was almost a little bit
But
fun.
strategically, when you say jumping around, it was super strategic,
Oh, yeah.
low pressure. I just want to make sure
Oh, yeah.
everybody
No,
is clear on
absolutely.
that for sure. Yeah,
And
and
you were having encounters.
yeah,
It was like I'm thinking, oh, he's going to go over here and shoot this deer, and then you went over here because it was like these two sets are good for different winds. And you went over to this location to then be like, well, I saw that deer that was a mature. It was kind of
right.
crazy to how things were playing out. So share your story.
Yeah, so that's a great point to bring up about the encounters because you had tagged out fairly early the first weekend, and between having your new daughter and me getting a lot of new business stuff going on, I didn't have a whole lot of time to hunt either. So even through October, I didn't hunt a whole lot down there. But I was just impressed. You and Zach had an encounter over a couple of days with at least three shooters. It seemed like every time that I went and sat, even through October, I was having an encounter. If not a shooter, a pretty darn nice 3-year-old that I'd take a picture and send to you and said, and I knew I shouldn't shoot it, but I'm like, should I shoot this one?
Yeah.
So we kind of let those ones go. And I just barely got into the beginning of November when I shot my buck, and I had 3 encounters with shooters that weekend. I kind of flubbed an opportunity at a nice buck. I think that would have been the second morning I was there. And then the last day of the weekend that I was down there, I was kind of bummed out from screwing up my opportunity, but you know, everybody always says just get right back on that horse. I had the time, and I went to another spot that we had been seeing some mature deer coming in. We had the girls hanging around. It's the beginning of November. You can't go wrong. You got the food, like you mentioned. We overwhelmed them with food. What are we up to now? I lose track. Almost
It's
pushing
like,
20 acres.
yeah, I think we drilled like just under 20, and then whatever we broadcast, probably another conservatively 4, I would say,
Yeah,
broadcast, but maybe 5 or 6. So between 20-25 acres of food plots twice a year.
and then couple that with all the cover and the TSI that we've been doing, and the work that you had done with the machine in this particular area where I ended up shooting my buck. I didn't have time to wallow in self pity. I don't think I was in the stand. I don't know. I can remember like fidgeting around a little bit when I got up there, trying to make sure everything's hanging. I use an ozonics. I got that hung up, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, and I look over my shoulder, and here comes that mature buck in. I mean, we had does in that food plot almost, almost all the time, around the clock. So there was no doubt why he was there. He was coming in to see what these ladies were up to, and made a perfect shot on him. I went from the lowest of lows, from flubbing my opportunity the day before, to the highest of highs. But you mentioned the little bit of pressure, the low amount of pressure, how important that is to have that many opportunities. Now you got to be in a good area too. I mean, we're blessed. We're in an area where some bucks can get some age on them. Everybody's not that fortunate to do that. However, if we were in there all the time and hunting it on the wrong winds and putting too much pressure on it, it wouldn't be as special as it was. And that is so important. And when I first started learning this farm with you, I was kind of like having the mentality of, we got to dive in, we got to go after these deer. They're probably bedding here, they're probably bedding there, and you were always like, listen, I've studied this farm for years. This is how these bucks work. And I'm like, okay, he knows what he's talking about. He's shot plenty of mature bucks, but I'm wondering why we're not going after him. And then after watching this farm for a couple of seasons, it's exactly what you've learned and observed over the years. And I'm just glad that I don't know what the right word is, that I finally came around to your way of thinking, because it's incredible. It works. You keep the pressure low, you overwhelm them with food, you give them the cover, and give them the age, and it's just a recipe for success.
Yeah, I think that it's like that anywhere. I don't think that deer say, "Hey, I want," like if you're hunting public land, for example. I don't think deer go, "Well, I want to be 2, 3 miles from the road," right? I think what ends up happening is that, and you'll hear sometimes the inverse of this, depending on the situation. But a lot of times, what ends up happening is 90% of hunters put the pressure on the first 300 yards of a public spot. So not that a deer they say, "Oh, I know I'm 2 miles from public parking." There's just no pressure there. There's just no pressure. So that deer, guys will go, "Man, I hiked 2, 3 miles in. I was in the stand for 25 minutes, and here came this big 160-inch in Scioto County, Ohio, public land, and he came walking in at 10 o'clock in the morning, or whatever, 3:30 in the afternoon." It's like, well, yeah, because that deer, nobody else was probably going in that deep. And then you have the inverse of that, as public hunting has gotten more popular.
Oh
A
yeah.
lot of guys are diving in, and all of a sudden you'll have this guy go, "Man, I started noticing all 50 yards from the parking lot, all this really good buck sign. I hung my stand here. All the other guys are going this way. Well, there's no pressure up here. That the buck was coming right. You know what I'm saying? Like, just as a quick example. But I think a lot of
Absolutely.
that comes down to the spot that you killed your deer in. I hope in everybody's life they get a spot that is as consistent as that,
Mm-hmm.
because that particular spot is one of those, like, you hear stories about, like, guys that, "Oh, we've had a deer camp in Potter County, Pennsylvania, and that was old Pap's spot. He loved it. He killed a big buck back in 1965 there, so that's where he went every time." Or like there's something there, like, what draws you to a spot. But the problem is when you have a really good spot, you can overhunt it so easily,
Right.
because it's such a target rich environment. Whether you're pulling the trigger or not, it's like, who doesn't like to see deer? I hunted there opening night, um, that particular spot, perfect wind. I think I counted 28 deer. Now, some of them could have been the same, but I don't even know if I had my bow up on the hanger yet. I look up and hear three does coming in the food
Yeah.
plot. And some of them are pretty far. They're not all, super
Right.
close
Right.
encounters. So that's one thing I would say, is when you do the habitat work, it's so easy to want to sit on the same food plot, or especially where, hey man, this is where we're seeing the deer. We're seeing the deer. Um, you got to find a way that deer are going to use multiple parts of your property. Or if it's a smaller property, which I don't do any consulting or anything like that, but I do help sometimes guys call about vitalized seed questions or, hey, what about this on the food plot? And, it's a smaller property. I'm like, if it was me, I'd have like one good set on that, 20 acres or 25 acres or whatever it is. And it depends on the layout and stuff like that. But to me, it's like, that's my goal on this farm. And I would say, like, I didn't invent this. Like, I don't want anybody to think like, oh, he's trying to act like he came up with the new way. Like, there's so
Sure.
many guys who are way better at this than I am, but I've implemented it. You look at like the Druries. How many big deer are the Druries killing in a funnel out of a tree stand anymore? I
Right.
mean, you just don't see it very often. And I would say most of these guys, I haven't followed like the Lakoskis all that much anymore. Oh, Heartland Bowhunter, they do a ton. I mean, these guys are ate up with habitat work. It's not like they're just going on like back in the old day, a lot of the video was like outfitted hunts, which I love Michael Waldell. Like, I think he's so cool, but
Yeah.
that's like a very different thing. But these guys, and he does, has a big farm and manages his property too now. But my point being is, like, a lot of the stuff that's out there now on the YouTubes, and even I don't have Outdoor Channel, but some of that type of stuff, these guys are crafting a farm to where it's all based around low pressure, good quality habitat, good quality food, good access. If you can put a box blind, if you can, if not, you killed your deer out of the tree stand.
Yeah.
There's basically there is a natural pinch there. We've enhanced it by adding food. It's a finger that comes
Great
on
access.
two different ridges. You have really good access.
Yep.
You're not breaking sticks. You can get in there. I mean, like I said, I've gotten into that stand before and had deer come out
Oh yeah.
literally within a
All the
minute.
time.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
how do they even believe sometimes? You're like, how did that happen that quickly? So that's really my whole thought is, I want to hold as many mature deer as I can. So I want to keep pressure as low as I can. And I want to kill those deer where they want to make a mistake. They're going to make a mistake. I mean, you run enough trail cameras, you're going to go, now, why was that deer in there at daylight 3 days in a row? Like, they're going to make a mistake. So if you just keep the pressure low and you keep hunting with the right wind conditions, um, I mean, to me, that's the key. Good in our area, real good quality food, and you just keep wait till those deer make a mistake. Now, if it's the middle of the rut and you still got a tag, gun seasons are coming in, you're like, you know what, I want to get up on a pinch point. I'm gonna hang it, like, see if you can catch a deer just running, buck crazy through there. I don't see an issue with that. Like, I think you have a good opportunity to kill, you know,
Sure.
kill a buck. But if you're going after a specific deer based on trail camera data, and you're trying to say he's lived on this farm or near this farm, or he cruises through my farm or whatever, and you're trying to make that happen, I just, to me, that is the best way to do it: is low pressure, good access, good quality food, and don't kick that deer in the rear end and kick him out of there. Let that deer make a mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we talked a lot about what we did right. Can you think of anything that we did wrong or lessons learned, or maybe if not much of that, because I can't really think of anything we did wrong, but just looking forward, some stuff we can do to make it better? I know you talked about access to a couple of box blinds. We're going to plant some trees and thicken up some areas to make that even better. Can you think of anything else off the top of your head that the listeners can learn from?
Oh, man, there's so many things. I think, um, not that I don't know if we would have had the time, but some of the areas I'm already thinking about that we cut last year, edge feathering. I think it was a little bit of a mistake to not have cut a couple additional trails. We cut
Mm,
some that connected.
yeah.
I would have liked to cut a couple. So we cut some, let's just say vertically, just for if anybody's listening, right? I guess this is on YouTube, so people will see. But we cut some vertically. I would have liked to cut a couple additional, horizontally to those. And the reason being is, Now going into where some of those areas that I've looked, I'm like, it would be hard for a deer to even get through some of those, which they're in
Sure.
there eating. You can see the browse. But man, I just think how much better would it be if we had a little trail through there to where they could get it. Now we can always go back and do it, but that was definitely one thing I would say was a mistake.
Right.
Um, as far as hunting mistakes go, I mean, I think it's just fine tuning access. I think that's the biggest piece for me is um, fine tuning access. I think, again, I was very lucky to kill my buck early. I think fine tuning some camera positions could really help a lot. I think sometimes some of my cameras are set, a couple of the ones that you're showing me are set where maybe the sun's not right, or like, I know there's a big scrape on the edge of this field, but I also want to catch this movement. Well, like I'm trying to catch both with one camera and I'm not doing either well. So I'm getting a picture of, half a beam or, just things like that I think it's like, I'm being lazy. I need to either put two cameras there or I need to decide, hey, I'm going to move the camera during this time frame. And so those are some of the things that I think are again, are they mistakes or are they just something I could improve on? Maybe a mixture of both. But
Yeah.
I think that's so critical. I mean, everybody's lives today are so busy. Very few guys uh, get the chance to hunt, even 3 or 4 evenings in a row,
Right.
and that's really when your odds start to go up when you're, hunting 3, 4, 5 evenings in a row when you're, oh man, we're close, we're going to move. Very few guys get that. They get, maybe a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday morning, maybe Sunday or Saturday evening or morning as well, depending on the time of the year.
For
So
sure.
having that camera data, whether it's a cell camera or a older school camera, I think is really really critical. And I think taking the time to put those cameras in the right areas um, is something I could really vastly improve on.
Yeah. Good points, man. I appreciate it. I wanted to kind of go in a different direction with this, and I think we covered a lot of good ground. So, anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up?
No, man, I think it's all good. I think it would just, I appreciate you having me on. I could talk about this stuff for hours. It's just I want to add like 1,000 more fruit trees. I've planted 7 so far. So I'm excited about that. I started cutting some trees. We had that big cold front and snow front, was all coming through over the last several weeks. So I had a free day. I cut probably 50 or 60, yeah, probably 25 to 50 trees, depending on the size. Some of them were small. So yeah, probably 25 to 50, mostly maple, but fell them, left them. I actually had an old school SD card or camera, excuse me, with the old, 32 gig SD. No cell camera, but it had batteries and it was like fully charged. So I hung it up. I'm excited to check it soon. But that's really it. Just continuing to work on habitat and hopefully find a deer that's worth hunting for next year and find some sheds and um, just enjoy the ride, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yep, looking forward to it. We're jumping into habitat season here, full force. So, thank you everybody for tuning in. Check out our partners at Latitude Outdoors, Stealth Outdoors, Midwest Lifestyle Properties, Vitalized Seed, of course, Downburst Cedars, Morse Nursery, Packer Max, and First Light. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.